Welcome back to the Hidden Life of Trees, chapter 18. I was interested in reading in the last chapter about how trees can regulate the climate, something I'm particularly interested in because we take for granted the job that all the biodiversity and plants are doing as far as water and climate regulation. It was nice to hear about some of the ways that it does that. I was also interested to hear the specific shape of the branches and the leaves, how that was most effective for collecting rain, or in the spruces, the way that it was able to stabilize it in snow. And it's just like you look at a tree and you think, oh, that's beautiful, but actually, why is it that shape? That's really, really interesting. Okay, this chapter is called The Forest as a Water Pump. How does water get to the forest anyway? Or to take one step further back, how does water reach land at all? It seems like a simple question, but the answer turns out to be rather complicated. For one of the essential characteristics of land is that it is higher than water. Gravity causes water to flow down to the lowest point, which should cause the continents to dry out. The only reason this doesn't happen is thanks to supplies of water constantly being dropped off by clouds, which form over the ocean and are blown over land by the wind. However, this mechanism only functions within a few hundred miles of the coast. The further inland you go, the drier it is, because the clouds get rained out and disappear. When you get about 400 miles from the coast, it's so dry the first deserts appear. If we depended on just this mechanism for water, life would be possible only in a narrow band around the edges of continents. The interior of land masses would be arid and bleak. So thank goodness for trees. Of all the plants, trees have the largest surface area covered in leaves. For every square yard of forest, 27 square yards of leaves and needles blanket the crown. Part of every rainfall is intercepted in the canopy and immediately evaporates again. In addition, each summer trees use up 8,500 cubic yards of water per square mile, which they release into the air through transpiration. This water vapor creates new clouds that travel further inland to release their rain. As the cycle continues, water reaches even the most remote areas. This water pump works so well that the downpours in some large areas of the world, such as the Amazon basin, are almost as heavy as thousands of miles inland. Thousands of basin are almost as heavy thousands of miles inland as they are on the coast. There are a few requirements for the pump to work. From the ocean to the furthest corner, there must be forest. And most importantly, the coastal forests are the foundation for this system. If they do not exist, the system falls apart. Scientists credit Anastasia Makareva from St. Petersburg in Russia for the discovery of these unbelievably important connections. They studied different forests around the world, and everywhere the results were the same. It didn't matter if they were studying a rainforest or the Siberian taiga. It was always the trees that were transferring life-giving moisture to landlocked interiors. Researchers also discovered that the whole process breaks down if coastal forests are cleared. It's a bit like if you were using an electrical pump to distribute water and you pulled the intake pipe out of the pond. The fallout is already apparent in Brazil, where the Amazonian rainforest is steadily drying out. Central Europe is within the 400-mile zone and therefore close enough to the intake area. Thankfully, there are still forests here, even if they are greatly diminished. Coniferous forests in the northern hemisphere influence climate and manage water in other ways too. Conifers give off terpenes, substances originally intended as a defense against illness and pests. When these molecules get into the air, moisture condenses on them, creating clouds that are twice as thick as clouds over non-forested areas. The possibility of rain increases, and in addition, about 5% of sunlight is reflected away from the ground. Temperatures in the area fall, cool and moist, just how conifers like it. Given this reciprocal relationship between trees and the weather, forest ecosystems probably play an important role in slowing down climate change. Of course. Wow, there's a beautiful butterfly over there. For ecosystems in Central Europe, regular rainfall is extremely important because water and forests share an almost unbreakable bond. Streams, ponds, even the forest itself, all these ecosystems depend on providing their inhabitants with as much stability as they can. A good example of an organism that doesn't like a lot of change is the freshwater snail. Depending on the species, it is often less than 0.08 inches long, and it loves cold water. They like it to be no more than 46 degrees Fahrenheit, and for some freshwater snails, the reason for this lies in their past. Their ancestors lived in the meltwater that drained off the glaciers covering a large part of Europe in the last ice age. Clean springs in the forest offer such conditions. The water comes out at a constantly cool temperature, for these springs are where groundwater bubbles to the surface. Groundwater is found deep underground, where it is insulated from outside air temperatures, and therefore it is as cool in summer as it is in winter. Given that we no longer have any glaciers, this is an ideal replacement habitat for today's freshwater snails. But that means the water has to bubble up year-round, and this is where the forests come into play. The forests act like a huge sponge that diligently collects all the rainfall. The trees make sure that the raindrops don't land heavily on the ground, but drip gently from their branches. The loosely packed soil absorbs all the water. So instead of the raindrops joining together to form small streams that rush away in the blink of an eye, they remain trapped in the soil. Once the soil is saturated, the reservoirs for the tree is full. Excess moisture is released slowly and over the course of many years, deeper and deeper into the layers below the surface. It can take decades before the moisture once again sees the light of day. Fluctuations between periods of drought and heavy rain become a thing of the past, and what remains is a constantly bubbling spring. Although, it has to be said, it doesn't always bubble. Often it looks more like a swampy, squishy area. A dark patch on the forest floor, seeping towards the nearest little stream. If you take a closer look, and to do that you must get down on your knees, you can make out the tiny rivulets that betray the existence of a spring. Now, to find out whether this is indeed groundwater or just surface water left over from a heavy shower, reach for your thermometer. Everyone's carrying a thermometer. Less than 48 degrees Fahrenheit. Then it is indeed a spring. But what kind of a person carries a thermometer around all the time? Another option is to take a walk when there's a hard frost. Puddles and rainwater will be frozen, while water will still be seeping out of a spring. That's interesting. This then is where the freshwater snails call home. and here they enjoy their preferred temperature all year round. And it is not only the forest floor that makes this possible. In summer, a microhabitat like this could warm up quickly and overheat the snails, but the leafy canopy throws shadows that black out most of the sun. The forest offers a similar and even more important service to streams. The water in a stream is susceptible to greater temperature variations than spring water, which is continuously replaced with cool groundwater. These streams contain animals such as salamander larvae and tadpoles, which are just waiting for their life outside the stream to begin. Like the freshwater snails, they need the water to remain cool so the oxygen doesn't escape. But if the water freezes solid, the baby salamanders will die. It's a good thing deciduous trees just happen to solve this problem. In winter, when there's a very little warmth in the sun, bare branches allow a lot of warmth to penetrate. The movement of water over the uneven bottom also protects the stream from suddenly freezing. When the sun climbs higher into the sky in late spring and the air is noticeably warmer, the trees unfurl their branches, closing the blinds and shading the running water. Then in the fall, when the temperatures drop again, the sky opens above the stream when the tree drops all their leaves. It's tougher for streams that flow under coniferous forests. It's bitterly cold here in winter, and sometimes the water freezes solid. Because it warms up only gradually in spring, this habitat is just not an option for many organisms. But pitch dark streams like this are rarely found in nature, because spruce don't like having wet feet and therefore usually keep their distance. It's most often plantations that cause this conflict between coniferous forests and the denizens of streams. The importance of trees for streams continues even after death. When a dead beech falls across a stream bed, it lies there for decades. It acts like a small dam and creates tiny pockets of calm water where species that can't tolerate strong currents can hang out. The nondescript larvae of the fire salamander are just such creatures. They look like small newts, except they have feathery gills. They are finely stippled with dark markings and have a yellowy spot where their legs meet their bodies. In the cool water of the forest, they lie in wait for the tiny crawfish they love to eat. These little guys need crystal clear water, and the dead tree looks after this as well. Mud and floating debris drop to the bottom of the tiny dam pools, and because the stream flows are so low, it gives bacteria more time to break down harmful substances. And don't worry about that foam that sometimes forms in these pools after heavy rain. What looks like an environmental disaster is, in fact, the result of humic acids that tiny waterfalls have mixed with air until they turn into froth. These acids come from the decomposition of leaves and dead wood and are extremely beneficial for the ecosystem. When it comes to the creation of small pools, forests in Central Europe have become less dependent on dead trees falling down. They are increasingly getting help from an animal that has recently made a comeback after being nearly eradicated. You know what it is? This animal is the beaver. I have my doubts whether the trees are really happy about this, for this rodent, which can weigh more than 60 pounds, is the lumberjack of the animal world. It takes a beaver around one night to bring down a 3 to 4 inch thick tree. Larger trees are felled over the course of multiple work shifts. What the beaver is after are twigs and branches, which twigs and branches which it uses for food. It stockpiles enormous quantities of in its lodge to last the winter, and as the years pass, the lodge grows by yards. The branches also camouflage the entrance of the tunnel that lead into the lodge. As an added security feature, the beaver builds these entrances underwater so that predators can't get in. The rest of the living space is above water and therefore dry. Because water levels can fluctuate wildly with the season, many beavers also build dams blocking streams and turning them into large ponds. Beaver ponds slow the flow of the water from the forest, and extensive wetlands form in the areas around the dams. Alders and willows like to grow here. Beeches which cannot stand having wet feet die off, but the upstart trees in the feeding zone around the lodge don't get to grow old, for they are the beavers' living larder. Although beavers damage the forest around them, they exert a positive influence overall by regulating water supplies. And while they're at it, they provide habitat for species adapted to large areas of standing water. So as we close this chapter, let's return once again to the source of water in the forest: rain. Rain can put you in the most wonderful mood while you're out walking. But if you're not wearing the right clothes, it can be unpleasant. If you live in Europe, mature deciduous trees offer a very special service to help you. A short-term weather forecast brought to you by chaffinches. These rust-red birds with grey heads normally sing a song whose rhythm ornithologists like to transcribe as the chip chip choo choo choo, chip 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 choo choo choo. But you'll hear that song only on a fine day. If it looks like rain, the song changes to a loud run, 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 run. The end of the chapter. There are a few things I found really interesting in that. I like the way he talked about the importance of the coastal forests and the connection between forests across land for carrying water. I think this is one of the things that particularly interests me about the importance of interconnected ecosystems rather than isolated patches, and how they're essential for carrying water around the world. And he talked a little bit about how the spruces put the particular, I'm not sure what they were called, but chemicals up into the atmosphere that help to attract rain. It reminded me of looking into how certain bacteria that live on the surface of trees can also be important for rain formation. Yeah, it's all interesting. Okay, join me again for the next chapter, yours or mine. For now, I hope you're doing well wherever you are and getting to enjoy some of beautiful nature.